They swear an oath to protect, to serve, to hold the line. But what happens when the people sworn to protect become the threat? What happens when the brotherhood that is supposed to stop the fire is the one setting it? Welcome to The Burning Oath, the channel that does not look away, not from the fire, not from the history, and not from this. The fire service is one of the most trusted institutions in America. Consistently, year after year, Americans name firefighters as the most trusted profession in the country, above doctors, above teachers, above anyone. That trust is earned by the vast majority of firefighters who serve with complete integrity every shift for their entire careers. But today we are talking about what happens when that trust is weaponized, when the badge becomes a shield for corruption, when the brotherhood that is supposed to hold members to the highest standard becomes the system that protects the worst ones. Bribery, arson committed by the people sworn to fight it, racial harassment covered up by the institutions that should have stopped it, hazing so brutal it crossed into criminal assault, corruption so deep it reached the highest ranks. This is the documentary the fire service needs to have and has never wanted to make. The Brotherhood breaks. Let's go. Welcome to The Burning Oath, the channel that does not look away, not from the fire, not from the history, and not from this. The fire service is one of the most trusted institutions in America. Consistently, year after year, Americans name firefighters as the most trusted profession in the country, above doctors, above teachers, above anyone. That trust is earned by the vast majority of firefighters who serve with complete integrity every shift for their entire careers. But today we are talking about what happens when that trust is weaponized, when the badge becomes a shield for corruption, when the brotherhood that is supposed to hold members to the highest standard becomes the system that protects the worst ones. Bribery, arson committed by the people sworn to fight it, racial harassment covered up by the institutions that should have stopped it, hazing so brutal it crossed into criminal assault, corruption so deep it reached the highest ranks. This is the documentary the fire service needs to have and has never wanted to make. The Brotherhood breaks. Let's go. Before we name names and tell specific stories, we need to understand the foundation that makes fire service scandals possible: the Code of Silence. The Code of Silence, also called the Brotherhood Code, the Blue Wall's fire service equivalent, is the informal but powerful cultural expectation that firefighters do not report misconduct by their colleagues, that they handle problems internally, that what happens in the station stays in the station. The code exists for understandable reasons. In a profession where you depend on your crewmates with your life, trust is foundational. Betraying a colleague feels like betraying the mission itself. But there is a version of this code that crosses a line, from protecting the mission to protecting misconduct, from loyalty to complicity. And when that version of the code takes hold in a department, it creates the conditions for every scandal in this documentary. Here is what makes fire service corruption worse than ordinary corruption. When a firefighter abuses their position, they are not just committing a crime. They are weaponizing the most trusted institution in America. They are using the badge that opens every door, because every American believes a firefighter is there to help, as a tool for personal gain. The trust that makes a firefighter's job possible is the same trust that makes a corrupt firefighter more dangerous than an ordinary criminal. That is what this documentary is about. Glendale, California, 1974. John Leonard Orr joins the Glendale Fire Department. He had wanted to be an LAPD officer, but failed the psychological screening. He settled for the fire department. Over the next 17 years, Orr rose to the rank of captain and became one of the most respected arson
investigators. Let's examine these V
in
patterns.
Southern California.
Excellent point, John.
He
Any tips for low
catching
burns?
more than
Ventilation
40
is key.
serial
Check the full
arsonists.
price. Connect later.
He was known for his uncanny ability to identify the cause of a fire, often before the official investigation had concluded. His colleagues never suspected that the reason he was so good at identifying arson fires was that he was setting them. Orr's method was precise and consistent. He used a time-delayed incendiary device of his own design, a lit cigarette attached to a book of matches, wrapped in yellow-ruled paper, secured with a rubber band. The cigarette would burn down, ignite the matches, and the matches would ignite whatever flammable material was nearby. He set fires inside retail stores, in the bedding and linen sections, which gave him his first nickname among investigators who didn't yet know who he was, the Pillow Pyro. He set fires at arson investigators' conferences, attending the conference, slipping away, setting a fire nearby, then returning to the conference to get the call to respond. He investigated fires he had set. He solved cases he had authored. He earned commendations for discovering arson at scenes where he was the arsonist. For 17 years. October 10, 1984, South Pasadena, California. A massive fire breaks out at Ol's Home Center hardware store during Game 2 of the World Series. Dozens of firefighters from 10 cities respond. The roof caves in. 4 people die. Matthew Troidel, 2 years old. Ada Deal, Matthew's 50-year-old grandmother. Carolyn Krause, 26 years old, a mother of 2. Jimmy Satina, 17 years old, an employee. Investigators declared the cause an electrical fire. Then John Leonard Orr arrived at the scene. He disagreed. He insisted it was arson. He was correct, because he had said it. 4 people died in a fire he started. He investigated it. He pointed investigators toward the cause. He knew exactly where to look. He was not convicted of these murders until 1998, 14 years after their deaths. In 1991, investigators finally arrested John Leonard Orr. Among his belongings, a 104,000-word unpublished novel he had written titled Points of Origin, Playing with Fire. The book's protagonist is Aaron Stiles, a firefighter and arson investigator who is also a serial arsonist, who sets fires in retail stores, who sets a fire in a hardware store where multiple people die, who
Reading my
attends the
father's book was like
investigations of
meeting him
fires
again,
he has
but as a
set.
stranger.
The
I learned
prosecutor
who he
at
was,
Orr's
the parts he
trial
kept
called the
hidden. It
similarities
hurts, but it's a gift I
uncanny
carry.
and striking. Orr's own daughter called reading the book disgusting. Orr insisted it was fiction. It was not fiction. It was a confession that he had written himself and kept in his own home. John Leonard Orr is the most prolific serial arsonist in United States history. He is believed to have set nearly 2,000 fires over 30 years. He killed at least 4 people. He was a fire captain, an arson investigator, a trusted colleague, a celebrated professional. His case exposed something the fire service had preferred not to examine: the psychological profile of the firefighter-arsonist, the hero complex, the need for validation, the thrill of the response, the performance of solving crimes you have authored, and the fact that the code of silence, the Brotherhood, had given him 17 years of cover, because his colleagues admired him too much to question him, because the institution trusted the badge more than it questioned the man wearing it. New York City, the Bureau of Fire Prevention. This is the division of the FDNY responsible for inspecting every commercial and residential property in the 5 boroughs for fire safety compliance: fire suppression systems, sprinklers, alarm systems, exit routes. If a building cannot open without fire safety compliance, it goes through the Bureau of Fire Prevention. In a city of 8 million people with tens of thousands of buildings, the Bureau's
The
inspection
COVID-19
queue
pandemic
is
created a
enormous.
backlog in the Bureau of
After
Fire
COVID-19
Prevention's inspection schedule. The
created a
queue
massive
grew and wait
backlog,
times
the
extended.
wait
This
for an
gap made a
inspection
corruption scheme
could
possible.
stretch to months. That backlog created an opportunity. Anthony Saccavino, Assistant Chief, Head of the Bureau of Fire Prevention, annual salary, $263,478. Brian Cordasco, Deputy Assistant Chief, his deputy.
Gauges are reading within parameters.
$257,295.
Nozzles are clear, noting
Together, they were the
compliance.
2 highest-ranking officials.
All
in the
systems
Bureau
are
of Fire
functional
Prevention,
and
the
compliant.
people responsible for ensuring that New York City's buildings were safe for the people who lived and worked in them. Between 2021 and 2023, according to federal prosecutors, they used that position to run a pay-to-play bribery scheme. Developers and building owners who needed inspections expedited were directed to a retired firefighter named Henry Santiago, who ran a so-called expediting service. Pay Santiago. Santiago paid Sacavino and Cordasco. Your inspection moved to the front of the line. The scheme netted Sacavino more than $100,000, Cordasco more than $90,000, on top of their already substantial six-figure government salaries. The scheme was made easier by something that already existed: a City Hall list, a mechanism by which City Hall could request that certain inspections for politically connected developers be expedited. Sacavino and Cordasco, according to prosecutors, used this legitimate City Hall mechanism as cover for their illegitimate bribery scheme. When they moved a project to the front of the line because a bribe had been paid, they could point to the City Hall list as justification. It gave the corruption a clean administrative surface. Federal prosecutors called it a VIP lane for faster service that could only be accessed with bribes. The properties ranged from a Brooklyn apartment building to two hotels near JFK Airport to a high-end Manhattan restaurant. At least 30 locations were involved. One developer paid more than $50,000 across 8 separate projects. Here is the
Sprinkler
question
head is
that
clean,
the
no corrosion or
FDNY
paint.
bribery scandal
Affirmative.
raises
Deflector
beyond the
alignment is
corruption
correct.
itself.
Initiating
When fire
alarm
safety
test 6
inspections are
inches.
prioritized by
Compliant.
who pays
Door
the biggest
operation is
bribe
smooth.
rather than by the actual risk profile of the building, does fire safety suffer? The Department of Investigation re-inspected all 30-plus locations after the scheme was uncovered. They found no evidence that fire safety was directly compromised. The bribed inspections were expedited, not falsified. But that finding rests on the assumption that the expedited inspections were conducted with the same rigor as inspections done in normal order, and the assumption that no buildings that needed inspection were passed over in order to prioritize the bribed properties ahead of them. When the queue is manipulated, every property that waited honestly while bribed properties jumped ahead is a property that may have operated with unchecked fire safety deficiencies that might have been found sooner. Corruption always has a cost. Sometimes you can measure it, sometimes you can't. Anthony Sacavino pled guilty in January 2025. Brian Cordasco's case continued through the court system. The FDNY conducted internal reviews. The Bureau of Fire Prevention overhauled its inspection protocols. The City Hall list was publicly examined in a way it had never been before. And the fire service across the country was reminded of something that every institutional corruption case teaches. The accountability system works only if there is someone willing to activate it. In this case, a federal investigation triggered by the...
When corruption is exposed in your department, it feels like a betrayal. The majority of us serve with integrity. And now we're also associated with a scandal we had no part in.
...has yet fully answered. Was no one inside the department aware of what was happening? Or was the code of silence once again protecting the wrong people? John Leonard Orr is the most famous firefighter-arsonist in American history. But he is not alone, not by a long measure. The National Volunteer Fire Council estimates that more than 100 firefighters are arrested on arson charges every year in the United States. The National Interagency Fire Center does not systematically track these cases. No federal database...
There's roughly 100 firefighter-arsonists convicted every year in North America, and all of them are serial arsonists, 3 or more fires. Fire agencies historically hid these them.
...that could track it have historically preferred not to, because acknowledging the scale of the problem means acknowledging the problem. Approximately 100 firefighters arrested for arson every year, every one of them a serial arsonist, meaning they set 3 or more fires. Every one of them had access to the fire. Every one of them used the trust of the badge to do it. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and fire service researchers have studied the psychology of firefighter arson extensively. The motives are more understandable than the public might expect, which makes them no less dangerous. The hero motive, the need for validation, for recognition, for being seen as the person who saved the day. Setting the fire creates the opportunity to be the hero of the response. The excitement motive, the adrenaline of the response, the intensity of the scene, the need to manufacture the stimulation that the job provides. The financial motive, in volunteer departments especially, responding to a fire can generate overtime, equipment time, and in some cases, employment with government fire crews. And the concealment motive, setting fires to destroy evidence of other crimes. These are not the motives of monsters. They are recognizable human failings, amplified by access to fire and the cover of the badge. Not all firefighter-related arson is committed by firefighters, but the Esperanza fire of 2006 demonstrates the catastrophic human cost when arson and first responder deaths intersect. October 2006, Southern California, Raymond Lee Euler, a mechanic who had trained for 3 months to become a volunteer firefighter before quitting, set a series of fires in the San Jacinto Mountains using the same type of incendiary device as John Leonard Orr. The Esperanza fire burned 41,000 acres, and it killed 5 firefighters from the U.S. Forest Service who were overtaken by the fire. Euler was convicted of arson and the 5 murders. He was sentenced to death. He had wanted to be a firefighter. He became the man who killed 5 of them. In 2015, the New York City Fire Department paid $98 million to settle a class action lawsuit. The plaintiffs, Black and Latino applicants and firefighters, who alleged that the FDNY's hiring exam discriminated against minority candidates. The federal lawsuit found that the written entrance exam used by the FDNY for decades had a disparate impact on minority applicants, that it screened out Black and Latino candidates at rates disproportionate to their actual ability to perform the job. The FDNY was ordered to increase minority hiring, back pay Black and Latino firefighters who had been passed over, and reform its recruitment and hiring processes. At the time of the settlement, Black firefighters made up approximately 3.5% of the FDNY's uniformed workforce in a city where 25% of the population is Black. $98 million. And then the question, did anything change? Los Angeles, 2017. Firefighter-paramedic Emmanuel Brown arrives for his shift at Fire Station 21 of the Los Angeles Fire Department, a coveted assignment. He is a 10-year LAFD veteran. He is Black. On Easter morning, he finds fecal matter stuffed inside the driver's side compartment of the ambulance he is exclusively assigned to drive. In the compartment where he stores his personal equipment, his breathing apparatus, his clothing, his oxygen tank. He reports it to his captain. The captain files a complaint with the department's Professional Standards Bureau. The investigation that follows takes nearly a year to produce any result. In the meantime, Brown reports being subjected to threats, comments suggesting he would be sexually assaulted, that his life was in danger, that he should have a living trust in order. He requests a transfer. He is told he is signing his life away. Brown eventually speaks to the Los Angeles Times. The department places him on what he describes as a threat list. The LAFD and the FDNY are not outliers. They are the largest and most visible examples of a pattern that researchers have documented across the American fire service. Black, Latino, and other minority firefighters report disproportionate rates of racial harassment at fire stations. Studies of fire service culture consistently find that minority firefighters face higher rates of informal discipline, fewer promotional opportunities, and more hostile work environments than their white colleagues. The code of silence that prevents misconduct from being reported applies to racial harassment with particular force, because reporting a colleague's racism means reporting a crewmate. And in the fire service, where the crewmate might be the person you depend on to pull you out of a burning building, that calculation is uniquely complex. The institution has a racism problem. Not every firefighter is racist. Compounding the racial discrimination problem is something that has been documented repeatedly in the fire service: nepotism, the practice of hiring, promoting, and protecting firefighters based on family connections rather than merit. In 2017, Joseph Cassano, the son of former FDNY Fire Commissioner Salvatore Cassano, resigned as an FDNY EMT after posting a series of racist tweets, including, "I like Jews as much as Hitler." His father allowed him to resign rather than face dismissal. 2 years later, Cassano reapplied. He was rehired. Then, using a program designed to give EMTs a fast track to firefighter positions, a program specifically intended to help minority EMTs, Cassano was admitted to the FDNY Fire Academy. A white man with a documented history of racist statements, allowed to resign rather than be fired, rehired 2 years later, fast-tracked into the Fire Academy through a program designed for minority candidates. The institution's response, the mayor said, "Nobody's perfect. Nobody was held accountable." The fire service has a hazing problem, and like the racism problem, the arson problem, and the corruption problem, it is not new, it is not isolated, and it has been documented repeatedly. Hazing in the fire service traces its roots to the same source as the Brotherhood itself: the intensity of the bond, the initiation rites that are supposed to test and forge the new member's commitment to the crew. In its milder forms, hazing is pranks, hiding gear, food jokes, the harmless rites of passage of any tight-knit institution. In its more serious forms, it is targeted humiliation, physical assault, deliberate professional sabotage. In its most extreme forms, as documented in Marion County, Florida in 2024, it becomes kidnapping, battery, and waterboarding. And in every form, the code of silence enables it, because what happens in the station stays in the station. Marion County Fire Rescue, Station 21, Ocala, Florida, November 2024. A 19-year-old firefighter, on only his second shift, is assaulted by his crew. They smear grease on his shirt. They throw his belongings into the woods. They drag him outside. Then they demand access to his cell phone to view a video he had previously posted on social media. When he refuses, they waterboard him. They restrain him and pour water over his face until he cannot breathe. 4 first responders were arrested on charges of kidnapping, battery, and robbery. A battalion chief, a captain, and a lieutenant were fired. Ultimately, 10 Marion County Fire Rescue employees lost their jobs. One of the charged firefighters later said, and this is a direct quote, "I just feel like that went way too far. That's past what they normally do as a joke." Past what they normally do as a joke. Waterboarding was an escalation of normal behavior at Station 21. The investigation into Marion County Fire Rescue did not just look at the waterboarding incident. It looked at what made it possible. Internal department grievances filed in the aftermath described a culture of normalized deviation, where increasingly serious misconduct was tolerated because each step seemed only slightly worse than the previous one. Violence was reframed as horseplay. Assault was described as typical. The culture had taught everyone, over time, to mistake dangerous behavior for firehouse tradition. The investigation also found other patterns: racism, nepotism, a black lieutenant who had reported harassment that was swept under the rug, social media accounts run by technical rescue team members in uniform that contained misogynistic content, and a leadership structure that appears to have failed to see what was directly in front of it, or to have chosen not to. In the most extreme cases, hazing in the fire service has contributed to deaths. Not all hazing deaths are publicized. Many are settled quietly, their connection to departmental culture buried in NDA agreements and insurance settlements. The pattern is consistent with what researchers call the hazing to death pipeline in institutional culture, the incremental escalation of tolerance for harm, until an event occurs that the institution can no longer contain. And even then, the institutional response is often more focused on managing liability than on understanding why the culture produced the outcome. The fire service talks about coming home safe from fires. It needs to talk about coming home safe from the firehouse. The code of silence in the fire service is not a formal agreement. There is no document, no oath beyond the official one. It is a cultural expectation enforced through social pressure, professional consequence, and in some cases, direct threat. It operates at every level. The probationary firefighter who witnesses misconduct on his first shift.
The goal of the investigation is to build a case against the accused, or not to investigate at all. The system is built to reach a predetermined conclusion.
Receives a complaint and buries it because the firefighter being complained about is a department star with strong union backing. Attorney Kurt Verhoeven, who has spent 40 years in the fire service as both a firefighter and a lawyer, describes the fire service disciplinary system as binary. Leadership either believes misconduct occurred and builds a case, or doesn't believe it occurred and doesn't investigate. The truth and the victim are secondary to the institutional decision about whether to investigate at all. The reason the code of silence persists is that breaking it has real, documented consequences. Emmanuel Brown at the LAFD spoke up about the fecal matter incident. He was placed on a threat list. His colleagues made comments about his safety. He was told he was signing his life away by transferring to a safer environment. The Marion County Black Lieutenant reported harassment and nepotism. The complaints were swept under the rug. He faced what his attorney called retaliation. The history of fire service whistleblowers is a history of people who did the right thing and paid for it professionally, socially, and in some cases, physically, in a profession where the person you reported might be the person you depend on to get you out of a burning building. The institution has made speaking up more dangerous than staying silent. Until that changes, the code of silence will remain. The fire service union is one of the most powerful protections a firefighter has. The right to representation in disciplinary proceedings. The assurance that a firefighter facing allegations has access to counsel and due process. The collective bargaining that produces safety equipment, adequate staffing, and fair compensation. The union is also, in specific cases, the institution that makes accountability harder when union leadership defends members who have committed serious misconduct, when union contracts create procedural obstacles that prevent consequences for documented harassment, when the union's legal obligation to represent all members is used to represent the indefensible. This is not an argument against unions. It is an argument that union leadership makes choices, and those choices have consequences. A union that uses its power to protect harassers and corrupt officials is not serving its members. It is betraying the firefighters who depend on the institution's integrity to retain the public trust that makes their work possible. We have already met Raul Saez in a previous Burning Oath documentary, the 30-year OFD veteran who still carries the Pulse nightclub question. But there is another dimension of his story relevant here. Saez was one of the OFD veterans who raised concerns internally to leadership about the department's lack of an active shooter response protocol before Pulse. He sent emails. He flagged the gap. He tried to push.
I did everything right. I followed the protocols, raised the red flags, but they ignored me. The consequences are on them, but the grief is all mine.
Nightclub 300 feet from a fire station, in a city whose fire department had the equipment and the beginning of the training to respond earlier, but had not completed the protocol. He said, "I wonder sometimes if I should have done something else, if I could have pushed it, maybe it wouldn't be 49 dead. He raised his hand. The institution did not act, and he has been carrying that for nearly a decade. This is what speaking up in a non-responsive institution costs, not just the immediate consequence, but the permanent weight of the outcome that followed the silence. There is a simple principle at the heart of every scandal in this documentary. The fire service owes the people who speak the truth about it more than it owes the people who protect the silence. The firefighter who reports racial harassment deserves a response, not a threat list. The firefighter who flags a training gap deserves action, not ignored emails. The firefighter who refuses to participate in hazing deserves protection, not social exclusion. The arson investigator's colleagues who noticed that he always seemed to be first on scene deserved a culture that allowed them to say something. The institution's protection of the silence is the thing that enables every scandal in this documentary, and every firefighter who keeps the silence about misconduct is contributing, however small, however understandably, to the conditions that allow it to continue. We have spent this documentary on the worst of the fire service, the corrupt chiefs, the serial arsonist captain, the hazing culture that produced a waterboarding, the racism that produced a federal class action settlement. We owe the majority something more than that. The vast majority of the more than 1 million firefighters in America, career, volunteer, urban, rural, serve with complete integrity. They do not set fires. They do not take bribes. They do not harass their colleagues based on race or gender. They do not haze rookies. They go to work. They run into burning buildings. They pull people out of cars on highways. They administer CPR in living rooms. They do this for their entire careers, and they do it right. The scandals in this documentary are real. They are documented. They demand accountability, and they do not represent the fire service. They represent the failure cases, the people who betrayed the oath that the majority keep. Every scandal in this documentary produced some form of accountability. John Leonard is serving life without parole. Anthony Saccavino pled guilty. Marion County fired 10 employees and charged 4. The FDNY paid $98 million and was placed under a consent decree. But the pattern tells a more complicated story. The accountability came, in most cases, from outside the institution: federal prosecutors, civil rights lawsuits, federal investigations. The internal accountability mechanisms of the fire service, internal affairs, professional standards, union grievance processes, have a documented history of failing to catch, report, and address serious misconduct before it reaches the stage of federal intervention. Internal accountability that requires a federal investigation to activate is not internal accountability. It is the absence of it, covered by the presence of a structure. The reforms that would prevent the scandals in this documentary are not mysterious. They are documented. They exist in the departments that have implemented them. Professional standards investigations that start with every complaint, not with a leadership decision about whether the complaint deserves investigation. Anonymous, accessible, protected reporting mechanisms that make it safer to speak than to stay silent. Psychological screening during hiring that goes beyond checking for prior criminal history. Mandatory anti-hazing training, not as a 1-hour video, but as an ongoing cultural intervention. Genuine racial equity in hiring, promotion, and discipline, not as a settlement requirement, but as a department value. And leadership, chiefs, captains, lieutenants, who model accountability by holding themselves and their peers to the same standards they apply to everyone else. These are not expensive interventions. They require will, and in every department that has implemented them, they work. Every firefighter takes an oath. The specific language varies by department, but the core is consistent: to protect life and property, to serve the community, to uphold the law, to perform their duties faithfully. The oath says nothing about protecting the institution from accountability. It says nothing about maintaining silence about misconduct. It says nothing about loyalty to the crew above loyalty to the people the crew exists to serve. John Leonard Orr took the oath. He violated it for 30 years while wearing the badge it authorized. Anthony Saccavino took the oath. He spent 2 years selling the access it gave him. The firefighters who waterboarded a 19-year-old took the oath. They used the firehouse it opened to commit criminal assault. The officers who buried racial harassment complaints, they took the oath too, and they used the authority it gave them to silence the people the oath was supposed to protect. The oath is not the problem. The problem is treating the oath as a credential rather than a commitment. The Brotherhood breaks. That is what this documentary is called. It is not called The Brotherhood is Bad or The Brotherhood is Broken Beyond Repair. The Brotherhood breaks in the sense that the institution, in specific documented cases, has broken the oath it took, has protected the wrong people, has silenced the right ones, has covered up what should have been exposed and exposed to retaliation, those who tried to expose it. But a thing that breaks can also be repaired, and the fire service has, in its best departments, its most accountable leadership, its most courageous whistleblowers, the tools and the examples it needs to repair it. The arson fires can be caught earlier if the culture allows people to say what they see. The corruption can be stopped before it costs the public $200,000 in bribes if the internal accountability system is built for truth rather than for institutional protection. The racial harassment can end if the leadership decides it ends, clearly, publicly, with consequences. The hazing can stop the moment every member of every crew understands that what happens in the station does not stay in the station, and that the oath they took does not include a promise to protect people who violate it. The Brotherhood does not have to break. It is a choice, and it is being made right now, every shift, in every department, by each firefighter who decides whether the oath means what it says. If you are a firefighter watching this and you serve with integrity, which the majority of you do, this documentary is not an indictment of you. It is a demand of the institution you serve in. If you have witnessed misconduct and stayed silent, we understand why. The costs of speaking are real, and we are asking you to consider whether those costs are higher than what the silence allows to continue. If you are in a department where the code of silence is law and speaking up is punished, you are not alone, and there are mechanisms outside your department that exist specifically for this. The federal EEOC, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, your state's fire oversight authority. They exist because the internal systems sometimes don't work. And if you are the chief, the captain, the lieutenant, the tone of your department is set by you, by what you allow, by what you don't, by whether the oath is a credential or a commitment in your firehouse. This has been The Burning Oath, the channel that does not look away from the fire, from the history, or from the hard conversations about the institution that fights it. If this documentary moved you, share it. Because the conversation about fire service accountability needs to happen at scale, and you sharing this is part of making that possible. If you are in the fire service and you have a story, reach out. This channel exists to tell the stories that the institution needs told, the heroism and the failure and everything in between. Subscribe to The Burning Oath, new documentaries every week, stories that matter, told without flinching. The oath isn't just taken once, it's kept, or broken, every single day, by every firefighter who decides what the badge means.